Abby's racing or doing well, he'll text me sometimes before I even know things and be like, oh my God, Abby's racing really well. And I'm like, oh, is she? Or
Meet Molly Elizabeth Agnew, a sharp, culture-savvy journalist redefining how we talk about fashion and sport.
who is buying Pirelli merchandise? Probably someone that's got some more money.
One of the categories that was being shown prior to it, and he's like, Natasha, have you been following? I think it's so cool. They're all like, like sister teams. Women buy and shop far more than guys do, and we're constantly on there looking for stuff.
And I grew up basically having Alexander McQueen drilled into my ear, and this is Vivienne Westwood, and you should know these people. You know, when she won the series, I texted him and said, Abby won the championship. I was like, oh my God, that's so good.
There's nothing for on the market for us, so the more, the better.
Exactly. So it's very masculine oriented. They're selling all the same stuff.
We want different, we want more.
We want new.
Yeah.
Right. It's been decades since a woman has actually entered a race. Biggest misconception of F1 Academy is
Hey everyone, welcome back to The Sweet Take, the Paddock's Best Kept Secret and Milkshake's interview series. I am super excited to have journalist Molly Elizabeth Agnew with us today. Her work lives at the intersection between sports and fashion. She's covered the rise of the women's game, the styling of the paddock, and the athletes that are inspiring us to think about power and presence differently. Join us as we unpack what it means and where we're going. Welcome, Molly. I'm so excited to have you on The Sweet Take.
Thank you very, very much for having me.
As a Milkshake contributor, we are super excited to dive into your world. So why don't we first start with you sharing a little bit about who you are and how you got into this particular niche?
It's a very good question and a very fair question. So I started initially as a pure fashion journalist, so covering runways and red carpets and luxury fashion and the business of all of that. But I grew up in motorsports, so I came from a motorsporting family. My father was a racing driver. Things like F1 is kind of what I've known since birth. It feels like it's sort of in my blood. And as I've got older, I've got into many other sports as well and kind of discovered that for myself. There was a point I kind of just realised that fashion and style is really incorporating itself into sports much more in the last 5 to 10 years. And so I found a way to sneak fashion into sports and sports into fashion, and it's become its own sort of niche. And actually nowadays I pretty much only do pure sports journalism or sports with fashion as opposed to pure fashion. So I've definitely swapped them around, but that's so fine. It's not necessarily where I thought I was going to end up, but I have absolutely no complaints and no regrets. I love working in sports, and I love when I get to talk about fashion in sports.
That's amazing. So it was obviously a natural extension of, your childhood talking about sports and motorsports specifically. Did you always have an interest in fashion and runway fashion as well growing up?
Yeah, I did. And funnily enough, both obsessions and interests came from my dad, which kind of sounds like they wouldn't, but they did. So my dad, more so than just being, a car guy and a racing guy, loves fashion, loves luxury fashion. And I grew basically having Alexander McQueen drilled into my ear, and this is Vivienne Westwood, and you should know these people, which I'm really privileged and lucky that I had someone in my life that kind of taught me so much and opened me up to so much at a young age. So I really have loved both equally for a very long time, most of my life. So it is a real privilege, especially when I get to talk about fashion, specifically in motorsports, as opposed to other sports. I love them all, but when it's cars, there's just an extra little bit of love there.
Oh my gosh, I love that your dad was the inspiration behind your interest. He must be so proud. You're like a carbon copy of him, but now doing it.
I really am a carbon copy of my father. Unfortunately.
But can you tell us about a piece that you're most proud of? Something that changed a perspective that people had about whatever topic that it was?
Yeah, I'm really lucky that I've worked on some incredible things and interviewed incredible people and some amazing stories. For me, it's a toss-up between two pieces I did for Vogue last year. They were actually in quick succession with each other. I did a piece about beauty partnerships within motorsports, and a lot of that was a strong focus on the F1 Academy and Charlotte Tilbury, as well as Elf working with Catherine Legg in IndyCar. And for me, again, whenever I get to talk about motorsport, it's a love, but it's such an underrepresented aspect of motorsports, especially when we're talking about women and beauty partnerships. So I really felt like I was introducing some people to a new concept that they might not have seen before. The other one for me was I did a big piece on stylists in the WNBA, also for Vogue. And that's a much more talked about topic than beauty partnerships in motorsports. But I just got to talk to some incredible people, really. And it felt like a very fulfilling piece for me to write. And again, I got a lot of response from people that I know and people that I don't know saying, oh, you've really opened my eyes to something here that I didn't know about. And anytime that I get that response to a piece of work I've done, I know I've done my job. It can be quite easy to talk into an echo chamber as a journalist, especially when you work in quite a niche space. So anytime someone says, oh, I learned something, or you've opened me up to a new concept that I didn't understand or hadn't heard of, then I know I'm doing my job.
We're going to touch on both of those topics, F1 Academy and Stylists. Why don't we do the Stylist one first? Because I love that you did that work in the WNBA. WNBA is blowing up over here in North America. It's amazing to see. I love it. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess a lot of people probably might not assume that these athletes have stylists. You know, obviously Lewis Hamilton is known to have an amazing stylist, Eric McNeil in New York. Can you share with our audience what percentage of athletes actually have a stylist? Do teams have stylists? What are your thoughts on that?
It's a very different perspective when you're a fan of a sport and a fan of a group of athletes who are celebrities in their own right, but also maybe you work in the industry like we do. So we have a different perspective and often have different knowledge than fans do. And I understand why a lot of fans assume that Lewis Hamilton must pick everything that he wears, or Charles Leclerc's style, that's all him. That's got no one else written all over it. And unfortunately, that's just not the case. This doesn't just pertain to athletes. This is for celebrity. In general, the majority of actresses in Hollywood, even if they personally love fashion, they still have a stylist because someone's got to take the time to converse with the designers and the houses and organise transportation for the outfits and pull things together. That the actress is focusing on learning their lines and the athlete is focusing on training. So you can't expect these people to do it all on their own. However, that's not to say that celebrities and athletes don't care about fashion. A lot of them don't. Just point blank, they don't, and that is so fine. But a lot of them do care, and it's very clear that Lewis Hamilton has a serious interest in fashion and style, and he works with a stylist, and they work together in tandem with each other, very much like how Zendaya and Law Roach work together. Zendaya cares, and you can tell, but she still has a stylist. So the majority of drivers on the grid do work with stylists, especially the larger names and those that can afford to have stylists. Maybe not so much in their day-to-day lives when they're not at the track or not in a public-facing duty. But, you know, a lot of these drivers turning up to the grid on a Thursday, they might have styled their look. If they're doing any kind of photographed ad campaign, there's going to be a stylist working behind that. I know Charles Leclerc has been doing a lot of work with an amazing stylist, Carlotta, and she's done an amazing job with his editorial work. But again, that's work with the stylist. I don't think Charles is necessarily turning up going, I want to wear that and I want to wear that. And that's so fine. In terms of teams, actually, that's a really interesting point that you bring up because it was Mercedes earlier this year, by no coincidence, after Lewis left, they were advertising to bring in a stylist for the Mercedes Petronas Formula One team. And I thought, that's really interesting. Clearly they're trying to bring someone on board to, I assume, work with George and work with Kimi together. And I would assume that's to create some kind of cohesive look and branding for the team. But yeah, I think stylists are a lot more prevalent than people assume. But a good stylist is quiet with it. You don't look at the outfit and think, oh, that's got a stylist written all over it. It feels authentic to the celebrity, you know? So they're sort of seen and not heard, but they're there and they're doing the work.
Yeah, I think it's a really awesome point because it looks really natural. So you just assume that these athletes and celebrities, wow, they have the best style. They must know the best places to shop. But, you know, their full-time job is not that. And they have to focus all that energy into their full-time job. Who do you think is being styled in that natural way? And do you feel that there are some drivers that are trying a little bit too hard or not enough?
Interesting. Obviously, Lewis is the obvious answer, so, you know, let's not maybe even go down there. I think a very underrated driver in the paddock is Zhou Guanyu, style-wise. He does work with a stylist, to the best of my knowledge, but his looks feel authentic, and I do feel if he had more recognition in general within the sport, people would notice this and know it, but maybe because it's so authentic, it's not screaming in your face. And I also think along those lines, like with Zhou is Yuki Tsunoda, where his looks don't scream in any way, and that's nice, that's good, and he, again, best of my knowledge, does work with a stylist. I thought at the F1 movie premiere in New York the other day, he had a great look. I mean, he's small. Was it oversized? Yes, but it felt oversized intentionally, and it was well tailored, and I thought, do you know what, there's an underrated look. Obviously everyone's eyes are going to be on Lewis and Charles, but hey, Yuki Tsunoda had a really good look, and we're not talking about it, but maybe we're not talking about it because it's just subtly good. Not everything has to be show-stopping and Lewis turning up in bright pink or whatever, which there's nothing wrong with. He looks amazing when he does that, but that gets people talking. So there are definitely some good dressers on the grid, but they're just quietly getting on with it, and it's usually because they're midfield drivers too that we're just not talking about them as much.
Yeah, I totally agree about Zhou and Yuki, and I think Yuki has really stepped it up since he's been at Red Bull. You know, obviously he's getting more PR, he's moved from that midfield team to a top team, and his personality seems to be shining through what he's wearing, which is really cool. I want to know who designed that suit that he wore to the F1 movie premiere. I loved it. I hope and wish that the drivers and the WAGs use fashion as also a means to highlight other designers that are up and coming because they have this platform. Who do you think does that well?
The answer's obvious. The answer is obviously Lewis, and I think he does just do the best job at that, and I wholeheartedly think that's because across the grid he's the most interested in the industry as a whole, and he takes the most notice, and I think he has the stylist that has its finger on the pulse the most. Obviously he works with Dior, so we're going to see a lot of Dior, but we'll see many other brands too, and I like that his looks are constantly in rotation. Some drivers you're like, you know, maybe with Yuki, oh, he's wearing Hugo Boss, or of course George is always wearing Tommy Hilfiger, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I do think Lewis does a very good job of introducing new brands, new ideas, new silhouettes, new colours, new textures to the paddock that we're not necessarily used to seeing, and that's a really good thing.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of the brands, Boss and Tommy, that are obviously sponsors in F1, and I'm sure part of their contract includes the drivers needs to make a certain number of appearances at events to highlight the collection that's out right now. On that topic, which brands do you think are doing a great job with teams right now? And where are there some opportunities to either turn the dial up or down into some of these partnerships?
I've never been fully on board with how Tommy Hilfigered Mercedes is, because nowadays when I think of Tommy Hilfiger, yes, I think of Mercedes, but I think of, you know, Toto Wolff's white shirt, you know? I don't think, oh, there's a cute summer dress that I could have. And maybe that's because, unfortunately, Formula One is very masculine and male-oriented, so the majority of the Tommy Hilfiger clothing that I'm seeing in that context is male-oriented, and therefore it's just not going to hit as well with me. Perhaps that's as simple as it is, but I do think they're a little bit Tommy heavy, and I do wonder whether that's going to cause some friction now that they're working with Adidas, especially because they have this, let's be honest, Adidas is quote unquote a cooler brand than Tommy Hilfiger is, and it's for a younger, more youthful audience. That's just fact. And so I do wonder if that creates some kind of friction, that they're trying to put George in cooler Adidas items, but he's such a Tommy Hilfiger boy that I feel like it clashes. Yeah, other brands that are involved in the sport, I do think Puma could step up their game with Ferrari, just slightly, but that's me asking for a lot from the sport. I think what they are doing at the moment is perfectly respectable. They're not too involved, but they're not being seen in the paddock and not being seen on the drivers. It feels more attainable, in my opinion, to the fan base and Ferrari's fans than perhaps Tommy Hilfiger might feel in Mercedes.
I also saw that Tommy announced a partnership with the Cadillac team. So I'm wondering if there's going to be a transition from Mercedes to Cadillac, or whether they're going to just be sponsors of both.
Yeah, I really wouldn't be surprised, and I don't have any insider information on this. I really wish I did, so this is purely just my own speculation. But I wouldn't be surprised if Tommy go 100% into Cadillac, and that means that Adidas can step up 100% to Mercedes. And I do personally think that would be a good move.
Yeah, I mean, Adidas, German brand, Mercedes, German, and then Tommy and Cadillac, American, right? So makes sense. And on the topic of Puma, I do think it's interesting that it looks like they're trying to transition from this mass market kind of licensing style of merchandise to their more recent motorsport collaborations with F1, with BMW, have been much more streetwear, edgy, cooler. And I hope that they introduce more of that with Ferrari, because you have Lewis and Charles that obviously love that styling, and there's so much they could potentially do with that.
The potential is so great, and the opportunities are so large for Puma with the driver pairing that they have at Ferrari, that I think they would be stupid not to take that on board as much as they possibly could, especially because we don't know how long Lewis will be at the team, realistically. So strike while it's hot is my opinion. So I do think we'll see a lot more from Puma, but you know, it's clear that they're taking a new approach and they're figuring out how that works, and there'll be some trial and there'll be some error. But I think across the board, they're doing a good job.
While we're on the topic of collaborations, those ones that we've just spoken about, Tommy, Adidas, Puma, they're obviously long-term engagements with the teams, but there have been a lot of limited drops with motorsport collaborations and other brands. I would love to get your perspective on what you feel about a couple of these. The ones that come to mind are OVO and Red Bull that just dropped, Rude and Pirelli, and then Duke and Dexter with Alpine. So do you feel that these are authentic collaborations? Do you feel that they are just kind of hopping on the trend?
I find all of these collaborations fascinating. For the main point, if you open them all up on your browser, on your laptop, they're selling all the same things, just in different colorways to match the brand that they're working with. They're all selling baseball caps. They're all selling an oversized white t-shirt and maybe an oversized black t-shirt. They're all selling some kind of quarter zip or half zip to really push the boat out. And they're probably all selling some kind of varsity or leather motorbike jacket. That's what you're getting. The only differences is the price and the brand involved. So therefore, obviously, the colorways might be different. I think the OVO one with Red Bull, for me, has a really accessible price point that I think is very positive to see. It feels genuinely attainable to the majority of Red Bull's fan base, because let's be honest, it's Red Bull fans buying it. The Pirelli is much more expensive. But on the flip side, think about it realistically, who is buying Pirelli merchandise? Probably someone that's got some more money to spend. You know, that's not your average young fan who just wants to support a team. That's probably someone that has more knowledge, is maybe a little bit older, has more spare cash to throw at a £300 baseball cap. Not me, personally. It wouldn't be my choice. And then the Alpine I felt was sort of like slap bang in the middle. And it's bog standard what you're going to get. Now, I don't own any pieces from any of these collections, so I can't talk to the quality of the product. But what I will say, just because a product is more expensive doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be high quality. So you might think that of the Pirelli collection, it's more expensive because it's more luxurious. Not necessarily. It might be, that might be the case, but that isn't always a guarantee. So for me, I'm not always that interested in these sorts of collaborations because they're selling all the same stuff. And what they are selling isn't for me, isn't for this younger female audience that is growing within Formula One. I might buy a baseball cap. I might buy an oversized t-shirt as a pajama t-shirt. I might wear a varsity jacket. But you can't guarantee that this audience will purchase that. So it's very masculine oriented, and that is fine. Let's be honest, the majority of the Formula One audience is that audience. You're ignoring a growing population of fans and a growing fandom that is more female oriented and far more feminine. And so really, it's just poor business on their end because they're losing out on an opportunity here because I'm not going to buy it.
Yeah, I agree. I do think the collaborations are really cool. The same as you, don't own any of the pieces currently, but the ones that I would purchase are the ones that you mentioned. But I do think there's a massive opportunity to cater to this female audience. Like, let's be real, women buy and shop far more than guys do, and we're constantly on there looking for stuff. And none of these brands are really creating pieces that we're running out and signing up to buy it early. So I think there is a big opportunity there. And Susie Wolf, I heard recently, she was quoted as saying that the F1 fan base is now 43% female, so almost half. I think as of 2 years ago, it was 40, so it's gone up a couple percentage points. But when you have, close to 500 million fans, that's several million. So it's a lot. And yeah, I think it's a missed opportunity.
100%.
Well, while we're talking about brands and connecting with the female audience, I do think that some brands that are doing it well are with the WAGs. So recently there's been collaborations with Alexandra and Rhode, and Aloe seems to be working with all of them. Carmen, Kelly, Alex, who else? Kika. All of them are pretty much working with Aloe. And so I find it really fascinating that these brands are not in F1, but they are in F1 because they're very much being shown in a lot of photos and content that we're seeing. What do you think about that approach?
I call it guerrilla marketing. It's genius. It's the smart way of being in the sport without being in the sport. It shows a real understanding from these brands. So Aloe and Rhode and Meshki's been quite big in the conversation the last few weeks. They have their finger on the pulse, but they're also clearly someone on their team is getting involved in the communities and the fandoms because they know who these people are and they know the power and the draw and the influence that they can have. So I think it's very smart. Having said that, I don't think it ends up having much of an impact on a wide section of the fandom. I think it's very specific and very niche. However, in marketing, oftentimes that's a really good thing. So you don't need everyone to be buying your product and you don't need to be advertising to everyone. If you can get that small section of people that you know are going to be loyal and that are going to buy it because they really love Alexandra, for instance, then you're gonna get the impact that you want.
Well, I am all for it because there's nothing for on the market for us. So the more, the better.
Exactly. It's something better than nothing.
Yes. Yeah. Why don't we switch gears, Molly? You talked a little bit about one of the pieces that you're most proud of is the work that you did with F1 Academy. And I would love for you to speak about what you've been doing with F1 Academy. And we can jump into a couple questions there around what's most misunderstood. The new Netflix show is now out, which is obviously providing a lot more visibility into the sport. But yeah, we'd love for you to share what you've been doing with that.
That's such a wide question. Well, look, I love F1 Academy and I'm a really big fan and advocate for it. I don't think it's perfect. I don't think any kind of younger sporting series is gonna be. They're all gonna have their teething problems and their issues. But on the whole, I think it's incredibly positive and there are some remarkable drivers in this series. And to bring my father back into it, but I introduced him to F1 Academy last season. And I remember we were watching the Miami Grand Prix weekend, normal F1, and I said, oh, stay with me because the F1 Academy race is coming up. Hey, what is that? Explain it all. And the race comes on and he's like, oh my gosh, these girls really race. Like, they're going for their gaps. They're racing with some serious bravado. I was like, yeah, they are, Dad, they are. Okay, who are we rooting for? And I was like, well, personally, she's British, Abby Pulling, I know a lot of her team. I like Abby. I'm rooting for Abby. Okay, we'll root for Abby. And then she won at Miami Grand Prix and my dad was like, oh, that's really good. Ever since that day, if Abby's racing or doing well, he'll text me sometimes before I even know things and be like, oh my God, Abby's racing really well. And I'm like, oh, is she? Or, when she won the series, I texted him and said, Abby won the championship. I was like, oh my, so good. And then I was very lucky. I got to do a little bit of work with Abby just before she won the championship and afterwards on a few different things. And anytime like talking to Abby today, oh my God, I got to see her after the championship win. He was like, tell her that your old dad is really rooting for her and what she does next, stepping up into a new series. And for me, that is so rewarding. Obviously, F1 Academy is going to attract a younger audience like myself, like yourself. We're interested, we're on it. But to get, with all due respect to my father, a middle-aged white bloke who loves traditional racing, to have someone like him who was truly in the corner of F1 Academy and rooting for drivers like Abby, and this year he's texted me going, Ella Lloyd's amazing. You know, she's Welsh, so we're going to support the homegrown people. She's like, Ella Lloyd's amazing. And I'm like, yeah, she is. They're racing as well as they were last year. So to get to talk about it, again, like I was saying, it's when you can maybe change someone's perspective or get them interested in something new that they didn't know about, then I feel like I've done a good thing or done my job. So for me, most of the time when I talk about F1 Academy, it is introducing people to it. And I love that. And all of the people are so nice. They're so kind. All the drivers are amazing.
It's funny that you bring up your dad, because my dad also texted me recently and said, you know, I just was watching the race and it just happened to be one of the categories that was being shown prior to it. And he's like, Natasha, have you been following? I think it's so cool. They're all sister teams to the F1 teams on track. What do you think is most misunderstood about F1 Academy and its mission? And perhaps if you can draw parallels to the work that you do in football and in the WNBA that are much more mature women's sports, where do you think might be a disconnect, and how, they can draw inspiration from some of those other leagues as they mature?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I think the difficulty that F1 Academy has that other sports like basketball or football don't have is that the aim of F1 Academy eventually is so that motorsports is mixed gendered. Now, it's really important to know, and maybe people don't know this, but we've had women race in Formula One before. We're not waiting for the first Formula One driver, we're waiting to bring another one in. It's been decades since a woman has actually entered a race, let alone tested. That's not so common, Susie Wolff did amazing things, but that was 10, 15 years ago. We're still waiting for another full-time racing seat for a woman. In football and basketball, which I do a lot of work in, they're fully segregated by gender. So you have women's football and men's football. You have the WNBA and what I like to call the MNBA. And they're separated in that way. But I feel like the biggest misconception of F1 Academy is that it's trying to make a women's racing series that's going to lead to other women's racing series. And that's not the point. The point is to give a seat to young girls and young women to race, but the point isn't that they stay there. They only get 2 seasons in F1 Academy for a reason. It's just to give them on-track experience because no one else is giving it to them. So I think that's the biggest misconception, is that it is segregating women, and it's not. That's not the point. The point is it's a feeder to other things. So how it got Abby a seat in another series. That's the point. And now she's signed in Formula E, and hopefully that continues, and we'll see other success stories like that.
I did not know that. I actually was wondering, why did Abby not stay longer in F1 Academy? Well, that's not the point. Like you said, that's not the purpose of it. Was Jamie Chadwick also in F1 Academy? No.
F1 Academy learned from where the W Series went wrong with Jamie Chadwick. Was Jamie Chadwick won W Series multiple times. That's great. Good work, Jamie. But it meant that other drivers couldn't progress because she was dominating. And so in F1 Academy, if you win, you're out. And if you do your 2 years, you're out. Abby had no choice. She wins the championship and she's out. And that's a really good thing. It keeps it moving, keeps more girls getting seats in the series. So for me, it's just a net positive.
Yeah, I saw my first F1 Academy race when we were in Miami this year. And you're right, they're as aggressive. It's really great racing. I think it's almost better racing because the cars are smaller, so there's a lot of overtakes. All right, Molly. So why don't we close this off with a Milkshake tradition called Checkered Confessions. You're going to get a handful of questions from me where I just want your gut reaction. 1-word answers, the first thing that comes to your mind.
That's terrifying, but I'll try.
Okay, we have 8. Number 1, best dressed driver of 2025 so far.
Lewis Hamilton.
Most exciting collaboration you've seen this year. Doesn't need to be an F1. Fashion and sports collaboration.
I think it technically counts as this year. It may have been the tail end of last year. Aries and Arsenal. I'm an Arsenal fan.
A brand you wish would enter F1.
I actually think Aries would work really well in F1. I'd love to see what they would do because I know they would make something just different, and I want to see different. I'm sick and tired of seeing the same things.
That's the headline from this interview. We want different. We want more.
We want new.
Yeah.
Fresh.
Which female athlete is defining the runway, whether that's courtside, in the paddock, on the pitch right now?
Paige Beckers. Paige Beckers.
Okay. Dream editor-in-chief moment you get to cover. Who's the athlete and what's the topic?
Can I say Paige Beckers again? It's because, no, honestly, she looks so good. You could put her in a bin bag and she'd look great. And her stylist, Brittany, is amazing, does amazing work. I would love to see Paige. I think Paige could pull off like classic Vogue tutorials, even Mizell 90s high luxury fashion. I really think she could pull it off and I'd like to see it.
You should pitch
and
it.
I'd like to do it.
Yeah.
Well, you never know. Never say never.
Pre-race glam or post-game fit check?
Post-game fit check.
Most underrated female sports league from a fashion and style perspective?
La Liga in women's football. That's the Spanish league.
Yeah.
The Spanish players, especially at like Barcelona and Real Madrid, they have really good style. And it's subtle. Yeah. When it comes to summertime, I do check their Instagram for inspiration.
Cool. Okay, last one. A style trend in sport that needs to retire.
Am I allowed to say Max Verstappen's skinny jeans? Can I just say skinny jeans in general? Yeah. I'm sick and tired of seeing skinny jeans on the paddock. Please stop turning up in skinny jeans and your like racing team top. At least put a vague wide leg trouser on, just for my eyes.
Yeah, that's so funny. All right, there you have it. Molly, thank you so much for joining us today. We have loved chatting with you, and I learned a bunch of stuff as well. So I'm excited to share this with the audience. For everyone else, thanks so much for listening, and tune in for our next episode where we bring you more stories from the paddock and behind the scenes. Bye for now.